Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 2nd of August 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox@cynicalbrit.com, that's mailbox@cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. Those who did not realize, I was away in San Francisco last week, which is the reason there were no mailboxes. I did let people know, but some people seem to have missed it. I guess you can't really inform everybody. I was considering replacing the entire front page with a giant flashing sign that says, "Oh my god, I'm not here, please leave me alone," but even then I think some people might have missed it. First email comes in from Matt that says, on the 31st, BioWare announced that they'll be offering a free-to-play model, along with the current subscription model for Star Wars The Old Republic. The model will provide people going with the free-to-play route full access to the story of all characters, levels 1 to 50, but it limits people in the amount of character creation options and the amount of flashpoints and war zones they can run per week. It also completely disables operations for free-to-play. I've been playing the game since beta, but a month ago stopped playing because of money issues. So for me, a free-to-play option is great, but my issue is with the limitation. While I understand they have to limit it, I fear it won't bring in as many players as it should because of the limitation of the endgame. What are your thoughts on the free-to-play model for Star Wars The Old Republic, and any thoughts on the cartel points and shop? Well, I think most people saw this one coming. Really? You didn't? Well, I said this before, and I'll say it again. Star Wars The Old Republic is the last in a line of big-budget, hotkey-based subscription MMOs. And I think I'm pretty much right in that assumption. There are very few MMOs left in the West with subscription fees. Those that are either World of Warcraft or something a little bit different from the traditional hotkey setup. We've got Terra, we've got Rift, which is most likely going free-to-play sooner rather than later, although it's still doing fairly well. We've got Eve, which is of course completely different. And that is pretty much about it at this stage for any kind of notable game. The question is, why did it go free-to-play so quickly? I mean, this game tanked pretty damn hard as far as I can see. It sold over 2 million copies. I believe it peaked out at 1.7 million subscribers. So even then, at its peak, it didn't have everybody playing. And now it is below 1 million, but above 500,000, according to the recent EA call. You know what I see as the real problem, though? Over the course of 7 months, there was like one major update to that game. I played it for a wee while, and then I stopped. I pretty much did my story, and I had no real desire to continue. There wasn't really a lot of endgame content, and the PvP didn't really drive me to play it on a regular basis. But I did pay attention to the development, and there was like one major patch, 7 months, and pretty much nothing else. Seems like it was a lot of bug fixing, stuff that really should have been fixed before launch, and there was no sodding content. And you might think, well, MMOs, they kind of have this lack of content, right? You know, that's okay, it just needs to develop a little bit more. Yeah, but here's the thing. A lot of people were really salty about having to pay for the next Old Republic game. That's not what they wanted. They didn't actually want an Old Republic MMO. Who asked for that? I don't recall. What they really wanted was Knights of the Old Republic 3. And they essentially got that in an MMO form that they had to pay for every single month. Which is really a rather sour taste in the mouth of fans, I feel. So unless you put in some really great content and you start to make it obvious that that $15 a month is worth paying, then people are rapidly going to turn around and say, no. You think the WoW generation would be okay with paying $15 a month, but actually they're really not. And more often than not, you find that people that jump into games like Old Republic, they're not actually WoW players. They were players of Knights of the Old Republic. They just wanted to see the rest of the story. They didn't have the opportunity to actually do that without paying $15 a month. So I can just see that as being a big reason, and also the fact that the game just took no risks. I mean, it really, really did not. The best thing that game had going for it in terms of moving the genre forward had to be the dialogue system, but even then, I don't think that actually saves it. It makes the boring fetch quests more interesting. That's why I liked leveling in that game, because it had a story to it. Every mission had some context, and that was cool. Whereas a lot of the stuff in, say, WoW just didn't, and it was incredibly boring, and I didn't really care, and I also had a little bit of choice in there as well, so I could actually role-play my character, which is something, again, you can't do in games like World of Warcraft. The game just doesn't support that. However, even after all that, what else is there to actually do? Once you finish the story, do you go through another storyline? Well, you can, but more often than not, you will find that there are a lot of filler quests in there. Especially as you go further and further into the game. There's a lot of storyline stuff at the start, and then it starts to get padded out with more filler quests because, of course, they couldn't keep up the pace of storytelling over the course of 50 levels. The start of the Bounty Hunter stuff was really, really great, and then it kind of fell off towards the end. So that was a little bit unfortunate. Didn't really get the payoff that I think everyone was looking for at the end of their story arc. And then you've got the end game, which really consisted of Ilum content, it consisted of raid content, and it consisted of PvP, and that was about it. But there wasn't really a lot of any of it, and it didn't do anything that WoW hadn't already done better. Bear in mind, WoW's had so long to create this kind of raid content, and honestly, the Old Republic didn't do anything different in that regard. It was okay, but merely okay is not enough for people anymore. The game was so close to World of Warcraft in that respect that it just didn't keep people's interest. I, like many others, played it for a month or two and thought, yeah, this is okay, but it just feels like something I've done before, and that's because, for the most part, it was. I think I was fortunate in that I was playing a bounty hunter, which is the class which is least like a World of Warcraft class. I mean, I can use jump jets, I can run around with flamethrowers, there's even a little bit of aiming involved, that's cool. But if you played something like a Jedi Knight or a Sith Warrior, it was basically a warrior. For all intents and purposes. You could just look at the abilities it had, compare them to WoW abilities, and they're actually the same, so yeah, not too great. Anyway, that was a little bit of a derail, my apologies. Let's go on to the actual business model. So the issues with limitation. The weird thing is what they limit. Like, they don't limit the part which most people probably want to play, which is incredibly odd, I feel. I think that most people just wanted to play through the story and get their Old Republic 3 experience and then leave. That's what I wanted to do, and I was okay with it. I didn't even bother with the raids and the endgame stuff, because once I played through the story, it's like, this was okay. I would have very much preferred that this was a traditional Old Republic game, but it's not, and the story was alright, and I probably got my money's worth, so I'm just going to go to a different game now. And now they've made that content free. It's like, but your raid content isn't very good, and your PvP content isn't really all that good, and while the space combat's a little bit fun, it's really nothing more than Rebel Assault, which, quite frankly, was boring 10 years ago. It's a really odd thing to limit, plus the way that they've limited it doesn't make a lot of sense. So, there are games that do limit content when it comes to MMOs, and in fact, one of them is very successful. It's called DDO. Dungeons & Dragons Online had a renaissance after the Eberron Unlimited patch, where everything went free to play. But that heavily limits the content you're able to do, but what it does is it allows you to get at it in different ways. Either you subscribe, so you get your $15 a month subscription, everything's unlocked, and you get a bunch of coins every month, just like this model is going to work with the Old Republic. Or you can pay for the content you want to do, so it's pay as you go. It's like, well, you know what, I'd really like to do that dungeon, so I will buy that content pack, which comes with a bunch of quests and dungeons in there. It's all themed, so it's really nice to be able to do specific pieces of content if you're not too fussed about doing everything. Or you can have your friend buy you a guest pass, which is really cool because it costs barely anything, and then you get your friend into the dungeon for a certain period of time, and you go run the dungeon with them, and that's it. And that's a really cool way of subsidizing the free players, because more often than not, the free-to-play model is based around the game being subsidized and the players who are playing it for free being subsidized by the guys who are actually paying money, and the majority of people aren't paying money for a free-to-play game. And it works because the others are. DDO realizes that and gives them a way to directly do just that. So overall, it's a pretty damn good system, quite frankly. There's also all sorts of things like boosts and everything like that, which is also, I imagine, going to be in the Old Republic. But I'm not seeing any other way of getting access to the content here. So either you do operations or you don't. Yeah? No operation access whatsoever. Huh, that's a little bit weird, isn't it? So either you have full access or you have no access. Why can't I just buy access, or why can't I buy my friends guest passes? Maybe they only raid once a week, so maybe I can subsidize them for that, or maybe they can subsidize themselves for that. Maybe they pay $1 a week, so effectively their subscription fee is $4, but they only do one operation a week, and that's how they do it. That's the cool thing about DDO. That's also the cool thing about the Lord of the Rings Online model. But here, you've got this weird disconnect and a very odd set of choices. I mean, to me, I would actually play this game free and not really feel the need to spend a dime. Why? Because it limits your number of war zones, flashpoints, space missions. Alright, I'm alright with that. Why wouldn't I be? I don't have a lot of time anyway. It seems like this is perfectly tailored towards someone who doesn't have a lot of time to play the game. I'm not going to run 20 flashpoints a week, maybe I do 1. And am I really interested in the raids? Probably not. Do I want to do 50 war zones a week? No, I'll do a couple, and then that'll be it. So, I just don't think they've designed this very well, honestly. I get the whole convenience thing with travel features and things like that, but honestly, it seems like a lot of people are just going to come back to this game, play it for free, have no reason whatsoever to buy any content, and it's going to be very difficult to get people to make the jump. There's nothing in between. There's no middle ground to take. You've got to provide a lot of different options to your consumers. We could, of course, be wrong. Yeah, this is from the very detailed FAQ that they put out, which is a horrible FAQ, by the way. Each question loads up a different web page. What the hell's wrong with you? Who coded that? But if you compare that and, of course, the feature matrix, which has subscription versus free, you got to think, well, where is the middle ground? Where's the pay-as-you-go? Where are the multiple tiers of payment that cater to different kinds of people? That's what makes free-to-play MMOs successful. You can't treat an MMO in the same way as you treat a normal game. You've got to deliver your pricing differently. You've got to restrict your content in a different way. And I don't actually think that BioWare really understands how to do that. I'm not seeing any evidence of it. Who knows, closer to autumn we might have some more information that may indicate that I'm completely wrong on this, but I don't think they're setting this up all that well. That said, it's damn good for the consumer. It's like, hey, the story content, pretty much the only thing Old Republic is good for, that's free. Alright, thanks. I guess I'll just play that again then. This one comes in from Emil. It says, "Hey TB, short question this time. I was reading an article on Rock Paper Shotgun about PEGI, or PEGI ratings, now being law in the UK. Personally, I think this system is wrong and should only be for guiding, not enforcing the law. As being a 16-year-old teenager, I can certainly see why you would have a system which warns people against violent video games, since some people can't handle them. But when are adults going to understand that kids and teenagers have different limits of violence and things they can handle themselves? My question is, should ratings be guiding only and not enforced, or is it okay to enforce these ratings?" Alright, so I did, a long time ago, work for a game store, and we had to concern ourselves specifically with BBFC ratings. If I sold an 18-rated game to a minor, I could be fined, I could even go to prison. So that was a pretty big deal. We were very, very careful about that. However, there were situations, in fact there were a lot of situations, where an 18 or 15 rated game would be bought by a parent with their 8-9-year-old right next to them. It was blindingly obvious who it was for. There was nothing we could do about it. And indeed, we shouldn't be doing anything about it. That's none of my business. In fact, I actually think that a lot of adults understand that some children and teenagers can deal with violence, they can deal with adult themes better than others. That is up to the parent. And here begins the great debate of nanny state, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, from the UK, I know what nanny state means. And it comes down to the idea, should the government be intervening with parenting? More to the point, which is where people get really, really angsty, by the way, should they be interfered with by the European government? Because what does PEGI stand for, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, Pan-European Game Information. Oh, hang on a moment, those bloody Continentals are at it again. So here's a quote from Dr. Joe Twist, who sounds like he should be an 80s gangster rapper or a soft drink, and he is CEO of the Association for UK Interactive Entertainment. Says the arrangement is strict in the same regards as rules on alcohol or cigarettes. We very much believe that the sole adoption of PEGI will provide clear and consistent direction on age ratings for parents. This only applies to brick-and-mortar stores, by the way. Digital isn't. And that's because you need a credit or debit card. Does the explanation actually hold any water? Well, in terms of confusion, it actually kind of does. Here's the thing. In the UK, the BBFC rating system is very, very recognized. You guys in the US have something as well. You've got the MPAA, who are responsible for that kind of stuff. And you then have ESRB ratings as well, and I don't believe those are enforceable. PEGI was our equivalent, but the BBFC is our MPAA equivalent. So why is the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification, classifying video games? One has to wonder, but that was how it was for the longest time. We also had ELSPA ratings for a while, and now we've got PEGI. It's uber confusing, I think, for a lot of people. So having a single rating system, yeah, it's fine. Being legally enforceable, well, that's a different matter entirely. It's very hard to come down on one side or the other here, especially bearing in mind that as an adult, I'm kind of biased. I think every adult and indeed every teenager is. Teenagers obviously say, well, you know, I'm mature enough to play 18-rated games, and adults are like, we don't care. I mean, we're over 18 anyway. These ratings don't actually apply to us, and oh god, please think of the children. What really gets me is that there's a 6-year prison term, up to 6 years and fines for selling games to minors. So, as someone on the minimum wage, you can actually get put in prison for 6 years for selling to someone that looks 18 and actually isn't. Potentially, of course. I would imagine that courts are not going to be doing that, especially on the first offense. That's crazy. But the fact that it's even there is absurd. Really. 6 years in prison for supplying video games to minors? In what universe is that alright? Sure, fine the store. Absolutely, why not? Fine the store, maybe even fine the individual so at least there's some kind of deterrent. But prison? Are you nuts? That, as far as I'm concerned, needs to go. The 2 years for BBFC rating stuff was bad enough. 6? Seriously? I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm from the perspective of someone that's actually worked in that situation before, and I really don't like that sort of Damocles hanging over my head when all I'm doing is making $5.50 an hour or whatever. It's not exactly good. As regards to everything else, yeah, it's good that it's all being consolidated into one thing, and it's gonna do bugger all, quite frankly, so who the hell cares? It's still gonna be the decision of the parent to purchase a video game that is rated higher than the age of the person that is gonna be playing it. That's up to them, so I don't really see anything changing too much in that regard. Well, this mailbox is going to drag on a little bit long, because I want to get these 3 questions done, so let's make that one happen. I essentially answered 2 questions at the start anyway, and one of them wasn't even asked. Well, that's just the way that it goes. Ask me about MMOs, and I tend to ramble. This one comes in from Jack that says, I've recently been playing a lot of a free-to-play game called Monsters Den Chronicles. It's a turn-based dungeon-crawling game with semi-randomly generated maps that each have set objectives to complete while leveling your group of adventurers. However, the main thing that makes this game different from other similar games is that the enemies in the game all scale to your level. What this means for gameplay is that no matter what part of the game you're in, you'll always be facing enemies that are capable of defeating you. Do you think that games that adapt their difficulty to the player's skill are the way of the future? No, I don't, honestly, because this is not a new thing. Plenty of games have tried this before. One of the most infamous was probably Elder Scrolls Oblivion. That was a game that constantly matched you up, supposedly anyway, against monsters of your level, but it also resulted in some crazy crap happening. Every bandit was wearing full glass armor. I mean, come on, really? Where do bandits get that stuff? You walked out of a town, you were instantly assaulted by 3 minotaurs. Like, how did they even know I was here? Come on! Can I just have a regular wolf or bear? No, absolutely not. We get the fire-breathing ice bear of Helberin come down on you. No, I don't want that. That's actually a little crazy. So the problem with RPGs is that the progression is very mathematical. It's not about getting better in terms of your skill, especially in turn-based games, I might add. Yeah, of course, you do get better at the game, you learn its quirks, but for the most part, how well you do is based on 1, your strategy, and 2, perhaps more importantly, the level and equipment of your characters. So upping the difficulty at that point ceases to make any degree of sense. The reason is, you've got to wonder, why do you bother progressing and upgrading your character if stuff's just going to match you anyway and feel as tough as it did at the start? Now, needless to say, a lot of people are going to disagree with me on that, but that's Mailbox for you. It's my opinion. What I would say is that the thing about RPG progression is you must be able to go back to an old area with your amazing gear and slaughter some fools. Why? Because then you feel more powerful. You've actually felt like you've upgraded your character in some way. You've actually leveled up. If stuff continues to be exactly the same difficulty, then you get problems. So that's it from an immersion standpoint, but there are also issues with the fact that a game can't always adapt itself properly. It's okay to have a difficulty spike every once in a while. It's okay to have a challenge to overcome. If the game is constantly adapting itself, then more often than not, you won't actually have all that many challenges. You can't necessarily trust the game to provide you with a constant challenge, and more often than not, you don't actually want it. There are times when you want sections of a game to be a slaughterfest because it makes you feel powerful. Horde sections, the occasional loot pinata boss. You want that. That actually spices the gameplay up. Conversely, having a really difficult boss also gives you that difficulty spike, and it gives you a great sense of achievement once you beat it. So it is alright to do that. I don't think that being consistent is necessarily good in game design. I think you've got to have those surprises every once in a while to keep people guessing and to keep people interested in your game. If an entire movie, for instance, had no dramatic scenes of any sort and it was just kind of par for the course, then you wouldn't get any emotional response out of the people watching it other than flat-out boredom. It's also not really a new thing by any stretch of the imagination. Games have been adapting to your skill for the longest time without consciously, or in this case, in terms of the coding, doing that. Levels get more difficult, and more often than not, they may set the bar just a little bit too high, and you have to get better in order to go past that. Once again, that gives you a sense of achievement. There are other players that simply aren't challenged by a game at all, and while it's good to have challenges for those players, usually that's what hard mode is for. I don't really agree with the idea of adaptive difficulty. I especially don't agree with it in terms of RPGs. What's the point in getting my golden sword of phoenix slaying plus 12 if the game suddenly adapts to that and says, alright, we're not going to give you any phoenixes then? That's adaptive difficulty in a nutshell. What is the point of all these upgrades if I'm just on the same treadmill? What is the point in having all this amazing gear and putting all of these points into stats and talents and things like that when the stuff I'm going to come up against essentially makes that gear useless? More often than not, in adaptive difficulty games, you're actually better off not leveling up at all. And in fact, that's what a lot of people did in Oblivion. They kept their level low so that the game wasn't crazy difficult. If they threw a lot of points into, say, acrobatics, and then ended up against minotaurs outside of the city every time they went out because they were level 50 acrobatics, obviously that is not realistic, but you get my point, then that doesn't make the game any fun. At the end of the day, I see very little reason to do adaptive difficulty with RPGs, especially bearing in mind that monsters tend to have a level, you tend to have a level, and you can provide challenge just fine. More often than not, you also provide choice. Do you think you're good enough to take on this monster that's a little bit higher level than you are? No? Okay, well, why don't you go farm the lower level guys for a bit? You feel powerful there, and you might get the experience and the loot that you need in order to defeat Big Bad at the end. That works perfectly fine, why screw with it? There are very few RPGs with this whole constant challenge thing, adaptive difficulty going on. Very few indeed. I can think of Kingsfield, I can think of Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and at that point I pretty much run out of ideas. I especially can't think of any turn-based games that do that well. But hey, it sounds interesting. I might give it a shot. I like turn-based games. Let's give it a try. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. I'll see you next time.